Well, it is officially confirmed with this episode of ACCA 13. It's no longer a theory, it's no longer just what we all think might happen, it is official. Gene and his sister are royalty. So this explains a lot. This clarifies a lot about Gene, why people are trying to say he's a part of, like, a rebellion, and why now we know he's being used, but also why he has all these connections, why he's in this, great apartment and all that. Everything makes a hell of a lot more sense now, because if he wasn't royalty, something else was going on here. So the big question is, who is using Gene? Because now that we know he's the next in line to become, the heir to the throne, like, he's going to be the next king, who is using him? It has to be someone high up to be spreading rumors about Gene. It has to be someone that knows about this information, someone that knows Gene's true identity, but it has to be someone that wants to make him look bad for, he can have his power removed, for someone else can move into his power. So the only person I could honestly assume would be, the other heir to the throne, the other prince that we saw introduced a couple of episodes ago, which in this episode, he realized who Gene really was. He was, the person that might be the true heir to the throne, so I don't think it might be him, but if we didn't know the information we got in this episode, I would assume it was him. But since we know what we know, something else is going on here. Something else is very shady, and someone else is really trying to use Gene for whatever purpose, we really don't know. But now it's understandable why many thought he was suspicious, or why he was possibly behind the rebellion, since he was, like, an heir to the throne. He was the next in line. So, the owner of, Gene's place now, we can confirm now that it's definitely the king. The king definitely owns it. He is the landlord. On top of that, we now know why all the business associates and all that have something to do with Gene while they're there. We also now know that, the portrait we saw in last week's episode, it was Gene and his sister's mother, the princess that escaped 33 years ago, which supposedly died with the person that was her bodyguard. So it's some type of romance story between, like, a guard and, the princess. They escaped, and I guess the king allowed that to happen. He probably hushed it to pretty much say, everything is fine, just act like you're dead, you can have the love you want, or the life you want, and that's kind of what probably happened there, and that's how, Gene and his sister came about. And when they died, it's, kind of fucked up, and probably the king was, watching over them the entire time since they lost, their parents. So that meeting in this episode also makes a lot more sense when you really step back and think about it. As we know, Nino, he's working for not just one person, but two people. We now know officially he is working for two different people in this episode, and I'm going to assume that he's working for the king. It's very obvious that he is definitely working on someone for the king, because we've had subtle hints already in the series that he has been watching Gene for 33 years. And, this isn't, the first or only time we've heard 33 years. We do know that, the princess disappeared 33 years ago and all that, so most likely Nino has been watching over, the princess. He's been watching over the entirety of, Gene's family and everything, and that's why he's mentioned that. And so the person he's actually talking with most likely is, the king himself, or maybe the actual king's assistant that we saw walking around constantly throughout this episode, or the other episodes of ACCA 13. So that's probably who his contact is. And it makes even more sense when you realize what happened this episode in the events that led up to, the revelation of finding out that Gene is royalty. As you remember, Gene, he wanted to get some bread. He wanted to get those, snowball bread or whatever for his sister, and he found out that the store is closed, and Nino was like, oh, it's closed and all that, why don't you come back together with me tomorrow, and we'll get those for your sister. And it's very funny when he goes over to get, this bread for his sister, the king decides to make a visit to this exact location that Gene was at. And so because of this, it's very off and suspicious, and the only way I could assume that something like this happened that wasn't a coincidence is that Nino set it up. He told the king, oh, this is, your son or whatever is going to be here at this place. If you want to meet him, you can meet him here. So the meeting between Gene and the king, that was supposed to happen. Nino most likely set that up for Gene could have a conversation with the king, and the king could actually see the person next in line to be the king of, the kingdom and also Doa. So yeah, pretty cool stuff with this episode. A lot of setup and build up. It was kind of a slow episode, but which really made the episode so much more impactful when we got some of these revelations throughout the episode, especially with, you know, the director general finding out about Jean's true origins, how he's definitely not a part of the rebellion and actually he's being used, to also, you know, just seeing Jean realize who he is or what his origins are, to also just seeing the portrait, just all these little revelations throughout the episode. It wouldn't have been so good if it wasn't for the slow pacing of the series, but also the slow pacing of this episode. And also, we do know that the series continuously is building up, because now, even though we know about Jean, and we do know that this man is royalty, there's something else still going on here. This doesn't get rid of the main plot of the series, and that is whoever is trying to start a rebellion. Now, we do know it's definitely not Jean. Like, we know for a fact now it is not Jean. This man was completely unaware of his origins. He had no idea, and also we do know now that Nino does have, you know, Jean's best interest in mind. He's probably working for the king, so he's definitely not a part of it, and also Jean is definitely not a part of it. We don't know really about how the king is. We don't know overall his entire personality, and I don't think overall it is the other prince as well, because of how he found out about Jean in this episode. So I don't think it's him, and I don't think it's, you know, Nino or Jean. I don't obviously think it's the sister either, and I don't think it's anyone that Jean thinks is probably not, you know, guilty. So who could it possibly be? That is the big question. Someone that is using Jean, someone that is, you know, trying to say, like, oh, he's the main reason, like, you know, why the rebellion's probably starting, because, you know, he is the next in line. Who is trying to use him? It's definitely someone high up there in politics, and, I mean, it would be pretty crazy if we found out that the director general of all people was the person probably doing it, which, that'd be kind of crazy, but I don't know if it's probably her, because, I mean, there hasn't been anything from her that seems relatively shifty or off about her, so I really don't know. We'll have to see where the series takes us, but it was a great episode, and I love what we got with this episode. So let me know your thoughts. I mean, how do you all feel about this episode? How do you feel about the music choice that they used in a lot of these scenes with the bass and stuff? I love you all so much. Please be safe. Chibi out.